In the wild, open country along the border of Idaho and Wyoming, a pair of steel rails hum a tune made by thousands of steel wheels. Canyons and valleys reverberate with a symphony of prime movers and AC traction motors. And in the winter, the snow flies along with the lonesome sound of a whistle in the cool mountain air. Welcome to Union Pacific's Pocatello Subdivision. Rolling on rails first laid by the Oregon Short Line between 1881 and 1882, the Pocatello Subdivision connects its namesake town and rail yard with the busy Overland Route at Granger, Wyoming. Part of the greater Oregon Short Line route that connects to the Pacific Northwest at Huntington, Oregon, the Pocatello Subdivision serves agriculture and mining industries in the region. It also provides a transcontinental connection between ports of Portland and Seattle with UP's major rail hub in North Platte, Nebraska, and beyond. We will begin our visit at UP's Pocatello Yard and head east for 214 miles to the connection with the Evanston Subdivision at Granger, Wyoming. Heavy manifest trains pound the rails. Long intermodal trains sprint to and from the Pacific Northwest. Unit trains include soda ash and grain. Even coal trains can still be found plying the rails. In part one of this two-part series, we will cover the western portion of the line between Pocatello and the one-time division point of Montpelier, Idaho. Trains pass the junction of the Ogden Subdivision at McCammon. Roll through Lava Hot Springs. And through the Portneuf Canyon to Bancroft. See the interesting town of Soda Springs. And follow the Bear River as it winds into a wide valley on the east side of the Wasatch Mountains. Even Union Pacific Big Boy number 4014 makes an appearance on its summertime tour to California. Shot in both summer and winter, this is an amazing adventure along Union Pacific's Pocatello Subdivision. The Oregon Short Line originally built west of this junction at Granger, Wyoming in 1881. Its goal was to meet and stop the advancement of the competing Oregon Railway and Navigation Company, which was in the process of taming the three summits of Oregon's Blue Mountains. The two railroads met at Huntington, Oregon in late 1884, creating a direct link between the Overland Route and the inland port on the Columbia River known as Portland. Part of Union Pacific's Portland area timetable, the Pocatello Sub officially begins at Pocatello Yard, milepost 214.2. Mileposts will count down as we head east for Granger. At East Pocatello, The railroad enters the Portneuf Canyon as a double-track main line for the first 21 miles to McCammon. Once known as Junction City, this is the connection with UP's Ogden subdivision, which continues south into Utah. At this point, the Pocatello Sub continues to follow the Portneuf River as it turns east through the mountains. At Topaz, double track resumes through Lava Hot Springs to Blaser. For the next several miles, the line is again single track with sidings including Pebble, Bancroft, Talmage, Alexander, and Soda Springs. This is where the Dry Valley subdivision splits off to the north for 24 miles to Dry Valley. At this point, the railroad turns to the south, following the Bear River through Manson and Georgetown. At Pescadero, double track resumes as far as Dingle, a few miles to the east of today's destination of Montpelier. We begin at Union Pacific's Pocatello Yard. In the early days of the Oregon Short Line, Pocatello was a junction between the railroad's Montana and Idaho divisions, with through traffic coming off the Overland Route to the east at Granger, Wyoming, the Pacific Northwest at Huntington, Oregon, and Ogden, Utah to the south. The landmark Union Pacific smokestack is the remnant of a powerhouse that was torn down long ago. At its base are the diesel shops where engines are serviced. Besides being a crew change point, Pocatello handles fueling and 1,000-mile inspections for trains between Portland, Oregon and Chicago. This was once an active hump yard and one of the biggest west of North Platte. Today, flat switching is done on trains coming from Butte, Montana, Ogden, Nampa, Soda Springs, and Montpelier, Idaho. Rebuilt EMD SD40-2s continue to earn their keep in the yard. The blue and white cars near the diesel shops are used in wintertime to shuttle crews when driving is difficult or impossible due to snow. This view is looking west, where UP's Nampa subdivision enters the yard. The tall grain elevator in the distance identifies the location of the Savage Railport, the first intermodal rail terminal in Pocatello. Opened in 2021, it provides a gateway for Idaho's agricultural goods to world markets. Union Pacific operates on 873 miles of track within the state of Idaho, and that isn't just track on which rail cars pass through. According to Union Pacific stats for 2023, Idaho originated a total of 82,449 rail cars, while it received 87,332. Top commodities shipped by volume are fertilizer, grain, frozen and refrigerated produce, sulfur, lumber, and building materials. The top agricultural products shipped from Idaho are potatoes, sugar beets, beans, grain, fertilizer, phosphate, and forest products. In addition to local traffic, transcontinental trains keep the rails polished, coming in from places like North Platte, Cheyenne, Portland, and Seattle. This adds intermodal trains, along with soda ash, auto racks, and grain trains into the mix. Add it all together, and you'll have a good idea of just what you'll find in the 215 miles of the Pocatello subdivision. Our mid-January visit to Pocatello came with a blast of Arctic air. Nothing unusual for this town in southeastern Idaho that is dubbed the Gateway to the Northwest. The elevation is 4,462 feet above sea level, and the lowest recorded temperature was negative 33 degrees Fahrenheit, set back in February of 1985. This morning, it is a considerably more comfortable 0 as we stand outside the old Greyhound bus depot and yard office for Union Pacific. The Art Deco-style bus depot dates back to 1946 and is one of only a few that still exist in the country. It was built by Union Pacific Stages. The Oregon Short Line Passenger Depot opened in 1915, and U.S. President William Howard Taft attended its dedication ceremony in August of that year. It served passengers until Amtrak's Pioneer was discontinued in 1997. Pocatello has always been a railroad town. The building of the Oregon Short Line brought about its incorporation into a city in 1893. Union Pacific's massive yard is only a shadow of what it once was. The railroad's first hump yard was opened right here in 1947, and rail traffic boomed. The hump operated until March 1, 2002. Trains are still flat-switched in Pocatello, but not on the scale of the yard's glory days. While on the subject of nostalgia, 3 examples of this railroad's past are on display at Ross Park, near the east end of the yard. The OSL 2005 is a Baldwin 282 built in April of 1911 for the Oregon Short Line. Next to it rests a wooden caboose built in 1923 as UP 25784. It was retired in 1969 and donated to the Pocatello Area Chamber of Commerce, where it eventually ended up here, painted as the OSL number 5784. And last but not least, EMD DDA-40X Centennial number 6901, built in June of 1969. This was the most powerful diesel-electric locomotive ever built on a single frame. Twin 16-cylinder 645 diesel engines produced an impressive 6,600 horsepower. The 6901 was one of 47 built exclusively for UP. Most of the Centennials were retired between 1984 and 1986. Well, that's enough history. Let's get to the trains. UP 7889 leads a manifest train eastbound toward the control point of East Pocatello, milepost 210.9. The 3 GEs are typical road power found on the subdivision: a GEVO, a rebuilt C6044AC in UP's newest paint scheme, and an AC4400 CW. This eastbound isn't departing just yet. It arrived in Pocatello from Nampa, Idaho about an hour ago. It has had a crew change, and its rear DPUs were cut off. And now the 7889 will do some switching before continuing east. After clearing control point P211, the train is quickly backed into the near track with a conductor protecting the shove. There is a westbound Z train waiting to enter Pocatello as soon as this train is in the clear. Like many rail yards, there is an ebb and flow to traffic. It can be empty and slow one day, or busy and full the next. On this day, Pocatello is approaching the full capacity, with seemingly more trains arriving than departing. By the end of the day, we heard the yard towers say Pocatello was officially racked, stacked, and packed, and trains had to be parked wherever they could on the main, since there was no room for them in the yard. We finally see the Z train entering the yard behind the manifest on what looks to be Main 2. The Portneuf River leads the railroad into the mountains off the Snake River Plain. UP 6664 is eastbound on Main 1 with an empty soda ash train for Green River, Wyoming. Just above the train to the south, we can make out traffic on nearby Interstate 15. East of Pocatello is the small town of McCammon, where we find a junction with UP's Ogden Sub near milepost 189.7. The line departs Pocatello as a double-track main, but goes to a short section of single track at the east switch. UP 5341 is westbound, most likely for Brooklyn Yard in Portland, Oregon, with a long train consisting of domestic stacks and a sprinkling of UPS trailers and FedEx containers. Not long after the cloud of snow settles, an eastbound is upon us behind UP 8046. Unlike the westbound, which consisted mostly of 53-foot domestic stacks, this train is entirely made up of 40-foot marine containers. The train continues east on the Pocatello subdivision, and we will catch up to it again as we follow the railroad into the mountains along the Portneuf River. McCammon was given the nickname Junction City because of the meeting of the Oregon Short Line and the Utah and Northern Railway. Operated in the 1870s and 80s, the Utah and Northern was the first railroad built into Idaho. It began as a 3-foot narrow-gauge spur built by the Mormons. In 1880, it was acquired by UP's subsidiary Oregon Short Line and extended north to Butte, Montana. The line was converted to standard gauge in 1887, and today it is UP's main line to Ogden. The branch heading north to Butte is also used to this very day as UP's Montana subdivision between Pocatello and Silver Bow. This is the McCammon Railroad Depot, which dates back to 1900. It was an upgrade from the original station built in 1892. Located a little west of the railroad junction, it is currently used as the McCammon City Hall. Long before there was a railroad or a junction, this was known as Portneuf. It was named after a French-Canadian member of an 1820s trapping expedition led by Peter Skene Ogden. In 1841, the first immigrants to Oregon's Willamette Valley passed this way on what would later be known as the Oregon Trail. In 2024, the westbound soda ash train blows for the crossing at East 12th Street on its way to the top of the Willamette Valley, Portland, Oregon. The train is in dynamics as it drops down a gentle 0.93% grade through McCammon. UP 6382 leads a monster Z train east through McCammon with 496 axles. The locomotive configuration is 4x2. Right on its heels is what looks to be an even bigger stack train with 558 axles. It is led by UP 5749, an AC 4400 CWM, M meaning modernized. The 5749 was built in February 2001 as an AC-44CW CTE. It is one of 1,000 older model GE locomotives that are part of UP's upgrade program, which began in 2018. The work is done by Wabtec in Fort Worth, Texas, which purchased GE Transportation in 2019. The program is expected to take 15 years to complete, and it gives these classic GEs a new lease on life. The second half of this eastbound is a mixed manifest. That would explain the extra axles. We catch one more westbound before leaving McCammon. The trailing UP 6148 is another modernized AC 4400 CWM. The extra dynamic brake fan intake behind the cab and modification to the radiator gives it away as a rebuild. The 6872 had no place to fit in Pocatello, so the crew is told to tie it down just west of here at Inkom. Our next stop is near the small town of Lava Hot Springs. As you can guess, it is known for numerous hot springs located right in town. A clear block on signal 1803 for Main 2 tells us we have a westbound. UP 3034 leads a unit train of sulfuric acid toward Pocatello. Idler cars have been placed between the locomotives and hazmat tank cars. Returning to Lava Hot Springs in July, recently rebuilt UP 6933 leads an empty soda ash train east on Main 1. It looks like the rear SD70 Ace number 8903 had a hasty bath recently. The old cinder block looks like it's been working in tunnel country. Another rebuilt C6044AC number 6898 works mid-train. This is the 22nd day of July, and Big Boy number 4014 is eastbound for Montpelier as it returns to Cheyenne from a western tour. Flipping the calendar back to January, UP 8198 is westbound near Blaser with a loaded soda ash train out of Green River. Blaser is control point G177, as it is located at milepost 177 on the Pocatello subdivision. At this point, the railroad transitions to a single-track main line with sidings for the next 57 miles to Pescadero. At Simmons Road near milepost 175.5, a few horses hunker down with their backs to the wind and snow, while UP 8046 is again seen heading eastbound with its train of international containers. The old Oregon Trail followed the Portneuf River west through this narrow valley and on to Lava Hot Springs. This fairly easy course through the mountains was chosen as a suitable route for the railroad, with a ruling grade of no more than 0.82%. On a sultry July afternoon, UP 8578 takes more empty hoppers east between Blaser and Pebble. We continue our eastbound journey as the railroad follows Old Highway 30 past an old siding known as Pebble. The ramshackle Pebble Inn was known as Mike's Place, a bar that opened up in 1945 by a man everyone knew as Whiskey Mike, a former moonshiner during the Prohibition and one-time track inspector for the Oregon Short Line. Whiskey Mike had a good rapport with the railroad men, and it was said he always had a drink ready for crews of passing trains. In return, bags of coal would accidentally fall off of certain trains as they lumbered past the siding of Pebble. Today it is fairly quiet around Mike's Place, and trains only stop occasionally to make meets at the 7,339-foot siding. And if you're looking for solitude in between trains, you can find it here. We waited near Pebble for two westbounds that were heading our direction, hoping to take advantage of some nice evening light. Being January, the sun retires early, and it slipped behind the mountains as UP 5653 finally entered the frame. The thermometer dipped to 0 Fahrenheit by the time the second westbound, UP 3941, came into view. The local is returning from Soda Springs to Pocatello. The railroad stretches across the expanse of Gem Valley, so named for gemstones, mostly obsidian, which can be found along the valley floor. An eastbound rumbles toward Bancroft led by UP 5701, another recently rebuilt AC 4400 CWM. Another rebuilt AC number 7197 is tucked into the middle of the string of empty grain hoppers. Bancroft is situated in the heart of the Caribou Highlands, surrounded by vast fields of grain and potatoes. Not surprisingly, the town's history is tied to the Oregon Short Line, being named after its president and general manager, W.H. Bancroft. In 1882, during the building of the railroad, timber was needed for making railroad ties, and a sawmill was relocated here for that purpose. With the mill came jobs. Bancroft was designated as a village in the summer of 1898 and incorporated as a city in early 1941. Today, it is home to around 390 residents. Agriculture fuels the local economy, and Union Pacific serves customers here. UP 8721 takes a westbound train of overseas containers through town. A few hours later, UP 7770 leads another stack train east. Leaving Bancroft, the railroad continues on a southeast tangent through the Portneuf Valley. It is zeroing in on a pass carved by the Bear River between the Soda Springs Hills and the northern extension of the Wasatch Mountains called the Bear River Range. UP 7674 West is in dynamics as it drops down a 1% grade near Talmage. Old Highway 30 parallels the main line. In the wintertime, UP 7861 leads a long westbound stack train through Talmage. This train is running in a 3x4 configuration. In addition to the 3 engines on the point, 4 more remote-controlled DPUs are cut in mid-train. Old wooden grain bins line the tracks at Soda Springs near milepost 146. The town is named for hundreds of natural springs of carbonated water located throughout the city. The most notable is the Soda Springs Geyser, which was first unleashed in 1937. Unlike Old Faithful and Yellowstone National Park, this geyser erupted when city fathers were drilling to create a hot water pool as a city attraction. They accidentally drilled into a chamber of highly pressurized carbon dioxide gas and cold water. It spewed constantly for weeks, flooding the town until finally being capped. Today, a timed release valve opens every hour on the hour to let the geyser flow as a tourist attraction. With summertime thunderstorms darkening the morning sky, UP 5985 leads a manifest east through Soda Springs. Other attractions found at Soda Springs include this version of a galloping goose, called the Conda Bus. This motorized passenger coach ran between Soda Springs and the nearby Anaconda copper mining town of Conda in the 1920s and 30s. Today, the Conda phosphate plant continues to operate and is served by the UP. Other items of interest include this snowplow and Jordan spreader, which are stored near the junction with the 24-mile Dry Valley subdivision. A kerosene-powered jet snowblower is parked nearby, something we would love to see in action someday. For now, the only action is this eastbound grain train led by UP 5441. The empty grain train rounds a curve near the east end of Soda Springs and prepares to drop down to a meeting of the Bear River at Rose. Just west of the Y-track, we find a small dead line of older GEs. UP 9240 is a representative of the C40-8 model, built between 1987 and 1992, while others have the designation of C40-8W because of their wide cab design. Adding to the variety is the UP 9732, which is a C44-9W built in August of 1994. Union Pacific prefers the AC traction version of these engines, and you'll see plenty of them powering trains from the older AC 4400 CWs to today's Tier 4 ET44AH diesels. A couple of other examples of AC traction are powering this train. Two ES44 ACs number 8046 and 7657, along with GE's competitor EMD's model SD70ACE number 8525. After passing Soda Springs, the railroad takes a southerly heading, following the Bear River along the eastern flank of the Bear River Range. UP 5379 is running light on its eastbound move between Soda Springs and Montpelier. As the engine disappears to the east, it nears the siding of Manson. About an hour later, a manifest led by UP 6849 follows the Bear River east. Moving 5 miles down the track to milepost 126 near Georgetown, we again catch Big Boy 4014 on the final leg of today's run to Montpelier. Rail fans gather for a shot at the crossing of Nonan Road. The steam special continues into the Bear Lake Valley toward Pescadero. It wasn't long after Big Boy passed from view that the thunder of big diesel engines was heard again. UP 6382 takes a long train of stacks and auto racks east. Back roads follow the main line most of the way to Montpelier. This is farming and ranching country, and sometimes train crews receive warnings over the radio like this.
Maintenance always reporting cattle, maybe even on the tracks, just right at the OS at 121 or just west of the OS at 121. They're going to try to shoo them off, but who knows? Just use some extreme caution approaching 121 and let me know what you see, if the cows are still there, gone, or whatever.
The warning and the green signal is for UP 5944, with an empty soda ash train for Green River, Wyoming. Fortunately, the cattle were moved safely away from the tracks, and the 5944 was given permission for maximum authorized speed by the time the train came into view. The valley begins to widen at Pescadero as the railroad nears Montpelier. A single GEVO number 7947 leads a stack train eastward through the lush valley. A second GEVO assists mid-train by remote control. As the train stretches away from us through the valley, the town of Montpelier can be seen in the distance. With a population of less than 2,700, it is the largest community in the Bear Lake Valley. The Bear River is the largest tributary of the Great Salt Lake, stretching approximately 350 miles through Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah. It has the distinction of being the longest river in North America that does not reach the sea. Both the California and Oregon trails came through this valley as pioneers followed the course of the river north out of Wyoming. As we take in the grandeur of this little valley, we can't help but wonder what those pioneers thought as they headed west, leaving what they knew and most of what they owned behind them. Their dreams were ahead, just over that horizon, just around the bend. We'll make it if we just keep going. A few, though, decided to stay right here, and for those that did, this became known as Clover Creek. Settled in 1864, it was later renamed after the capital of Vermont by Mormon church leader Brigham Young. The Oregon Short Line Railway arrived here from Granger, Wyoming on August 5, 1882, and the population grew, making Montpelier the largest city in the Bear Lake Valley. A depot still stands just west of our location, and we will show it to you after an eastbound light power move races through town on the 70-mile-per-hour track. Montpelier was a crew change point on the Oregon Short Line between Pocatello and Green River until the early 1970s. Some of the largest railroad shops in the state were also located here, along with a 20-stall roundhouse, turntable, and facilities for fueling and watering steam locomotives. Today, local switching is still performed, and the old depot is used by maintenance of way crews. A pair of EMD SD70Ms head out to do some switch work on this cold winter afternoon. The engines disappear under the Highway 89 overpass. Traffic on the OSL can be sporadic, with long periods of quiet in between trains. We caught word that a pair of westbounds were heading our way, so we stayed trackside even though the winter light was beginning to fade. The signals at control point CPG 115 are hot for UP 5486, which is in charge of a mixed manifest making an evening run for Pocatello. As darkness falls over the city of 2,500, a big M proudly glows in the snowy hillside to the east of town. Other lights can be seen on this winter evening, shining down from the signal bridge at control point CPG 117, which is the west end of Montpelier. The high green means our second westbound, UP 8907, is almost here. As the westbound's Fred, or flashing rear-end device, disappears into the night, it's time for us to say goodbye. For now, anyway. In the morning, we will resume our journey toward the UP's Overland Route at Granger, Wyoming, which is still over 115 miles to the east, and there is a lot more to explore between here and there. So as always, until next time, thanks for watching.